Hey guys, today I'm going to tell you about fluvoxamine, Luvox, the fourth SSRI that was developed and the one no one's ever heard of. It probably didn't get a whole lot of widespread use because it was only approved for the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder, which is compared to major depression and anxiety states, it's not very common. And it's actually still only approved for OCD, and the controlled release preparation has been approved for social anxiety disorder, but that's it. It doesn't have any other FDA approvals. However, it is absolutely efficacious. It's an SSRI. It increases serotonin. It's serotonergic, and it's absolutely effective in all of the anxiety states, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, PTSD. It's also an antidepressant. It is called an antidepressant more often than anything else, even though ironically it isn't approved for the treatment of major depression, but we use it there. We also use it in premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which that condition is not so much depression. It's characterized by a lot of agitation, a lot of irritability, and tearfulness, and so serotonin is great for that, because remember, at the end of the day, it's the serotonin that's coming to the rescue. If it's an SSRI, we don't really care what the FDA approved or didn't approve. It's not that we don't care, but the long and the short of it is they're all good for OCD. And as a matter of fact, I tend to think of Paxil, the most potent SSRI, when I think about treating OCD. And really, I think about clomipramine, which is a tricyclic agent. That belongs to the first generation of antidepressants because it is probably the most effective agent still today to treat OCD. And you can combine fluvoxamine and clomipramine, but you do have to be careful when you combine fluvoxamine with other medications because there are a lot of drug-drug interactions, and so that's one of the disadvantages. But poor little Luvoxamine, fluvoxamine, Luvox, it just, very few people have heard of it, and the makers stopped promoting it a long time ago, decades ago. Even practitioners, even especially primary care practitioners, have never used it and don't know a lot about it. But the side effects, because they're mediated by serotonin, again, in places where we don't want them, there's serotonin receptors all over the body, and so it's the serotonin that's causing the problem. And so it has a side effect profile that's similar to any SSRI. So it can cause nausea, it can cause diarrhea, it can cause dry mouth and hot flashes and sleep disturbance and lethargy and somnolence and sexual dysfunction and on, all of those things. But I would say that it stands apart as having a lot more gastrointestinal upset than the other SSRIs. So in that regard, it's like Zoloft. And it's actually also similarly dosed. It can go all the way up to 300 milligrams. And one disadvantage is that you might have to separate the dose. You might have to divide the dosage to tolerate it better. But really over time, you should be able to consolidate the dose if you just take it slow and you take it with food. And now they have a controlled release preparation that's not available in generic. So that one, I guess, is being promoted. But that one is also approved for social anxiety disorder. And see, the reason that it was approved, the reason that the controlled release is approved for social anxiety disorder and the immediate release is not, is because the controlled release is still patented. It's brand name only. There's no generic. And so there's money. Big Pharma, there are companies, whoever owns that patent, can spend the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that it takes to prove that it's safe and effective for the treatment of whatever, in this case, social anxiety disorder. And so they present all of that research to the FDA. It takes about a decade. Finally, the FDA puts their stamp of approval on it, and ta-da. But there's no reason on earth to believe that the non-controlled release, which is the exact same medication with the exact same pharmacodynamic action, the only thing different is the pharmacokinetics, because it's not controlled release, there's absolutely no reason to believe that it would not be effective for social anxiety disorder. It's just that no one has ever taken the immediate release and proven it because the immediate release is generic. It's in the public domain. Any pharmaceutical company can produce it and sell it. So anyway, that's my spiel on that. That has nothing to do with biology. It has nothing to do with biochemistry and psychopharmacology. It's just the politics of it. But it's effective in any anxious state and in any depression with anxious distress. Probably wouldn't be the first antidepressant I would think of for major depression, but there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't help if it's an agitated depression. Luvox can cause GI upset, diarrhea, or constipation. And so it's not quite clear why some individuals respond with diarrhea, that would be the more common, or the opposite, constipation. But patients with irritable bowel syndrome, you would want to maybe shy away from using Luvox and Zoloft in those patients. Otherwise, it's a great medication. Like Zoloft, weight gain is not expected. It is exceedingly uncommon. Can it happen? Possibly, but you would not expect it with Luvox. And in fact, some patients might lose weight. It does have a physical withdrawal if you're on a high dose, and so you don't want to drop the dose. You never want to abruptly stop any antidepressants or any medication that has psychotropic actions if you're on a high dose and you've been taking it for a long time. And so you want to lower that dose slowly so that you don't get withdrawal, paresthesias and dysesthesias and nausea and dizziness and sweating and a bunch of other non-specific, not dangerous, but very uncomfortable physical withdrawal side effects. But you also don't want rebound irritability and rebound anxiety. So you want to take that easy. If you feel like you've had all the SSRIs out there, I hear patients that tell me that they've tried them all and none of them work. And usually when a person has been on a lot of psychotropic medication trials, they've been inadequate trials, largely inadequate, largely because they weren't tolerated. So it's the side effects that made those trials be aborted. And it's not that they didn't work, that they didn't do anything. I always talk about, well, what were the target symptoms? And certainly it raises the threshold for tearfulness and irritability. And so there's no way that it's not going to have some effect. It's usually a story of it was tolerated poorly. I hated it, but it's often very hard to go and retrospectively and adequately evaluate a prior medication trial because patients don't remember that well. They don't know what the exact doses were. That was maybe years ago. You don't know what other medications or non-medications the patients may have been taking at that time that might have been affecting it. But when patients tell me that they've been on all the SSRIs out there, and I know that they need an SSRI and I want them to take an SSRI, that's my number one recommendation, but they're resistant, maybe for other reasons, maybe because they don't want sexual dysfunction. And that's really the real reason, but they don't want to say it or they haven't even admitted it to themselves. And so they rationalize that they've tried them and they don't work. But it's very vague when you ask. And it's always hard to retrospectively evaluate medication trials because there's all these variables that you just can't bring into play accurately. So instead, I cut to the chase and I pull out Luvox from my little bag of tricks because I know that most of them have A, never heard of it, and B, haven't taken it. So instead of saying, well, let's give Zoloft another try. I know you took it and you remember that it was a negative experience, but you don't really remember what symptoms it didn't work on or what the dose was or how long you took it or what else you were taking at the time, or you don't really remember what the side effects were that were so awful. But there's still a mental block, and then they say, oh, okay, they'll take it, but you're already starting a new medication trial. And there's already sort of a bad attitude about it. And, that matters. A negative placebo effect can happen. And you don't want someone to go into a medication trial reluctant to do so. Or just convinced that, all right, they're just going to prove to Dr. Silva that those medications, that class of medications don't work. Particularly if they're focused on another kind of medication, which I may be willing to co-prescribe, but we need to increase serotonin, whatever else we do. But instead of saying, please give Prozac another try, and they say, okay, but in their mind, they're half convinced, more than half convinced that it's not going to work because they remember that. Instead, we can bypass that little psychological trap, and I can say Fluvoxamine, and they can honestly say that they've never tried it. And so that can help sometimes, because why not try Fluvoxamine? It's a perfectly good medication that was kind of orphaned until whatever pharmaceutical company owns the Luvox CR brand decided to. It's the same company probably because it's the same name. It's Luvox CR. They just put CR on it. So that very same company could have proven that Fluvoxamine is effective in the treatment of social anxiety disorder, but because they don't own the patent on the generic Fluvoxamine anymore, they didn't spend the money. And that's how big pharma politics work. And so if you're not really happy with your SSRI right now and you'd like to try a different one that is almost certainly not going to cause weight gain, try that. Try asking for fluvoxamine. Ask your doctor.